In this video, I'll be listing down the best speed rackets that I have tested thus far, and they'll be based on the feeling of speed which I experienced during testing, and not necessarily because the spec sheet said so or they were supposed to be headlight or have a low balance point. Speed and power, they often go hand in hand with the best players. However, for most of us, we generally lean towards one or the other when we pick our own rackets and base it around our own personal gain. There's no right or wrong answer here, but traditionally speed rackets mean they have to be headlight to be fast, and that's true up to a certain extent. Modern day rackets are a bit more complex than that, but they are also getting lighter at the same time. Even just 10 or 15 years ago, rackets were mostly 2U and 3U weight classes. 4U rackets is probably the standard now, which many of the pros are using at the same time. I also get the sense that 5U rackets are getting more and more popular, especially around the beginner and intermediate levels, where players just want to be able to get the shuttle back easily and enjoy the game. Additionally, many will also use balance point or BP as a form of measurement to decide if a racket is headlight or not, and typically they're classified headlight if they're below 290mm BP. You all know I don't use BP as a form of measurement because of how unclear everyone measures it, strung or unstrung, gripped or no gripped. Additionally, as we now move into lighter and lighter rackets, the BP of these super light rackets will be a lot higher. A 5U racket will probably have a BP no lower than 300mm, and in that BP terms, it is not considered a headlight racket. So this balance point thing is a complete mess unless you're really comparing like for like. Also, almost all the rackets that I mention in here, I've published reviews on my channel, so if you want a more in-depth review, I'll try and link it up here as well as in the description below. If you're planning on buying anything from Central Sports or Li-Ning Studio, remember to use my discount code of CKYW to help you get extra discounts. Let's start with Yonex, and you all know I was so impressed with the NanoFlare 800. Ever since I tested it, I was hooked. Now, I'm not a headlight racket person as I prefer more oomph and bite on the shuttle, but the NanoFlare 800 was the first racket which almost got me to swap over all my current rackets to it. It's got a super thin frame design which certainly made it super fast, as well as a smaller compact head with fully recessed frame profile as well. This thing is electric and smooth at the same time, and I just found it really easy to play with. Because of it being relatively stiff, it had a crisp feeling when you come in contact with the shuttle, giving you lots of confidence and consistent accuracy with the shuttle. Hence, perhaps that's why many pro players liked it very much too at the same time. I would certainly recommend the 3U version over the 4U for the 800, as I found the 4U version too light. With that, its lightest sibling, the 800 LT, also makes my list for the fastest rackets. It had all the similar qualities of its heavier sibling, but has a longer shaft and a shorter handle. It's certainly a joy in terms of handling, counter-attacking and defense, but when it comes to pure attacking power, the 5U 800 LT does suffer a bit in that department. My more in-depth comparison of the 800 LT here. The third Yonex racket on my list might surprise some of you. What I'm referring to is the Astrox 88S Pro. When I first tested the 88S Pro, I was certainly shocked at how fast it was in terms of handling. This is probably again down to the fully recessed frame profile alongside a very slim shaft, plus 5mm shorter in terms of overall length. I might even consider the stringing pattern with the bigger gaps in between the strings having some effect on the swing speed of the 88S Pro. I'll repeat that this thing is rapid, and if you have a good decent technique and timing, you'll be able to unleash a lot of power with the 88S Pro. This kind of speed on a head-heavy racket opened my eyes to the modern generation of head-heavy rackets, because I never thought a head-heavy racket can be this fast. The fourth racket on this list is the more affordable brother of the 88S Pro, the Astrox 88S Tour. It had very similar specs to its Pro brother, but a lot head lighter. It doesn't feel as nice as the Pro, certainly not as smooth, but you get very good speed with this Tour. I believe this was Yonex's first multi-tier design philosophy where they use trickle-down technology across different price points on a launch model. And finally, a super speedy racket that I never formally published a review for, but I did all the filming and testing, was the NanoFlare 380 Sharp. The 380 Sharp was a mid-range headlight badminton racket which was made in Taiwan. It again had all the speed features such as a slightly more compact racket head frame with fully recessed frame profile. but it had the thinnest frame I've ever measured on a Yonex badminton racket at 9.3mm, a similar thickness to the Nanofly 800 LT. And because of this, the swing on this thing is buttery smooth with incredibly fast racket head speed. So essentially anything that comes towards you is super easy and a pleasure to play with. But anything that requires power isn't as good, as I struggled to find power from the 380 Sharp. I also like the super cool cone cap which sat above the wooden handle. It had this flat golden piece within it which makes squeezing the racket easy and stable. If you want something super speedy, fun and easy to play with and power isn't your concern, try this one. Let's now look at Li-Ning, and from the list of Li-Ning rackets that I've tested, only 2 rackets kind of surprised me with its speed, and both aren't headlight rackets. The first speedy Li-Ning racket that makes this list is the Li-Ning X-Force 80, and I remember I mentioned it in my full review here of course, that the X-Force 80 felt like it was too fast for its own good. And furthermore, I certainly think the X-Force 80 is one of the best looking rackets out there with its crisp matte black paint job with super bright neon pink and copper decals. Absolutely amazing. With its relatively normal sized racket head, but with a very thin frame as well as a thin shaft, sets this X-Force 80 up with a lot of speed. Coupled with not a lot of head weight for a head heavy racket meant this is a very lively racket. Li-Ning labels this racket as a medium stiff racket, but if you're a seasoned Yonex or Victor user, this is probably considered soft for you. On the pro circuit recently, we can see Yuta Watanabe, Srikanth Kadambi and PV Sindhu playing with it, so they must like the speed that's coming from this X-Force 80. If you want a softer feeling, relatively even balanced fast racket, this X-Force 80 would be for you. The second Li-Ning racket on this list would be the Aeronaut 9000D. The 9000D is part of a series of 4 vastly different Aeronaut 9000 rackets, which are predominantly attacking rackets. The 9000D, alongside its super cool looking cousins, the 9000C and 9000I, have this incredibly crisp, space-age-like matte design which certainly sets themselves apart from the rest. They also have these 4 air gaps on the racket frame around the T-joint, which I honestly thought looked very cool, but does very little in actual performance, at least for me. However, what I really liked about this 9000D compared to the rest of the 9000 rackets is its speed in terms of counter-attacking and driving. From my testing, I felt it did amazingly well in that aspect, and I really enjoyed driving the shot a lot more than usual with the 9000D. Most of you probably would have thought I would have picked the 9000i for speed, but I really enjoyed the speed coming from the 9000D more than the 9000i, as it felt hollow and unstable at times, so the 9000i did not make the cut. Other rackets that I have high hopes for, but have yet to complete testing, is the affordable X-Force 80JR and the X-Force 20. The 80JR is a 5U racket with very similar specs to the regular 80, but more recessed frame profiles, so it should be speedy. I'll be publishing my reviews for them when I'm able to, so make sure you subscribe for that. Finally, the third of the big 3 is Victor, and similar to Li-Ning, I've yet to test too many of their rackets, as it's often quite challenging for me to get hold of their rackets previously due to supply chain issues. But 2 of the fastest rackets that I've come across at the moment is certainly the Aura Speed 100X and the 90K. I'm obviously aware that the second generation of the 90K has been launched this week at the Victor Denmark Open, and perhaps with Anders Antonsen playing with it. Unfortunately, Anders had to pull out injured, so hopefully he's recovering well and can bounce back soon. On both the 100X and 90K, the racket frames had different shapes across the whole length of the frame, which Victor calls it dynamic sword frame. This changes how the racket frame flexes and adds better feel and shuttle response for the player. Both rackets have almost identical specs, with only the 90K having a slightly thinner frame and shaft at the same time. The 100X is certainly a repulsion based racket, as the shuttle wanted to scream off the string bed as soon as it was hit, and I also remember I was able to get incredible angles from it too. The 90K on the other hand was steady and fast enough to get on this list, so it had a very easy swing and feel which gives you a lot of confidence going into your shots. Both really good speedy rackets. I can't wait to test out the second generation 90K when it becomes available soon. Stay subscribed for these future reviews, and I will see you in the next one.